Right, the growth of democracy in different shapes and forms in Africa has underpinned the strong economic growth seen on the continent over the last decade. To review the state of democracy on the continent ahead of Africa Day, I'm joined by Ayo Obe, partner at Ogunshola Shonibare Legal Practitioners. Ayo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're celebrating Africa Day over this weekend, and I just wanted to get your thoughts about the importance of democracy in the economic growth story. Clearly, we have examples like Nigeria since 1999. Really, that's where you will tie the reforms that we're seeing. Some people suggest we're not doing enough, but clearly you can see a very close link with respect to democracy and economic reform. So in reviewing Africa today, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's difficult to make an exact connection, partly because there are certain things that are happening in the continent that even the undemocratic states are being carried along with.
Right.
But also, I think that there's no doubt, and we also have to recognize that for a country like Nigeria, democracy or the institutions that go with it are proving to be quite expensive. We all know about the costs of the National Assembly and so on. And yet, I think that to the extent that democracy is an expression of the idea that government is about the people and what is good for them, then obviously it eventually has to respond to certain issues. I mean, in Nigeria, we have 36 states. And having been involved with the state peer review mechanism, one can see that, which is set up by the Governors Forum about, to look for best practices and to see where are they going right, where are they going wrong, can they learn from their peers and so on. And that's all about responding to the demands of people. So I think that to the extent that there's an idea that we should now understand that it's not about my being in power, but my being in power to make life better for people, then democracy certainly comes into it.
Right, but it certainly has underpinned the growth of the continent. And I want us to really reflect on a statement from President Jacob Zuma a few years ago. He said elections are not sufficient. Democracy means far more. Your thoughts about this point, the development of democracy in Africa today?
Well, there's no doubt that the elections cannot be the alpha and omega of democracy. And I think that part of the problem that we've had with regard to our own attempts to practice democracy in Africa is that too often we've had the trappings of democracy, but the people running the system are not democrats.
Right.
So, and that's actually on two sides. It's not just that those who get elected into power lack democratic knowledge or credentials, but sometimes we, the electorate, also do not behave like democrats. We expect certain things to happen like yesterday or with immediate effect and so on. And so, and then we wonder why a heavy hand is not brought to bear on this and that. So so it's a two-way learning process for both the electors and the elected. Right. But I think that
I think one of the points he was trying to make was the need for strong institutions.
Exactly.
And your thoughts about how Africa is developing in that respect.
And I think that one can see, if one looks at South Africa, that although they didn't have a democracy, they were certainly building the institutions that go with it. Whereas we, having rushed in with our one person, one vote, without necessarily having strong institutions, have had a much more difficult path to tread. But gradually, one will find that these institutions become stronger. I think
you're optimistic that we'll see that change over the next
I'm certainly
couple of
optimistic. I think that the problem about military dictatorship, which is what many of us had gone through, is that it doesn't really allow the institutions to develop and stand on their own feet. So that if it's always that, it's like a child learning to walk. If you keep on saying, no, until you can stand up and run 100 meters, you must continue sitting down. Just watch me and see how I do it. Obviously, that's not going to work. So I think that by the practice, we are beginning to perfect our institutions. Not all of them, but more of them are saying, look, what exactly are we here for? If we're judges, what are we here for? If we're legislators, what are we here for? If we have oversight functions, is it just about getting elected and collecting allowances, or is it actually about making a real difference?
Right. A final point would be on the tests that we're seeing across the continent or in democratic regions. Central African Republic is a very clear example of that. Your thoughts about the vulnerability of democracy in certain countries?
Well, as I said, because we, the electorate, as well as those who are elected, also have to learn that things don't happen overnight. and that it actually requires effort from us. Our effort may be simply in terms of keeping those who have been elected on the path. But I think that we can all understand that until the governance issues and the basic factors of government are not settled in countries like Central African Republic and many parts of the central part of the continent, that the prospects of growth are always going to be a bit elusive. It's not just because of the tendency of power. It's not just because of the tendency of power to corrupt, but it's also because when you have power, then people stop asking you to account for it.
Right.
And it's the issue of accountability. And that's why you also find that when people are dependent so much on aid, they're not really dependent or accountable to the people who are paying what they live on.